And I want to also share with you some of the mystical commentary on it. You know, one of the great challenges that we have is our relationship with God. That's one of our big challenges. Understanding and keeping in proper perspective our relationship with God and realizing how God feels about us. Now, most I would think, maybe I'm wrong, but very often we have an impression of how people feel about us, and usually that actually impacts the way we respond to them or react to them. And with enough experience in life, we discover that we don't really always know, and very often we don't know what other people actually think and feel until they actually tell us. Some of us are such brilliant prophets and seers that even after they tell us what they feel, whether it's about us or whatever it may be, or what they know, we still know that that's not really what they feel and what they really know. You understand what I'm saying? And so we're always like smarter than everything because the only person we trust is ourselves. And this is one of the great challenges that we have with God. I would say I would call it a fundamental challenge that we have with God. And that is how God feels about us. And as I was speaking with someone today, and who's dealing with a challenge, I told them that I just want to make this very clear to you, that the challenge you're going through is not because of you, meaning it's not because you are a bad person and therefore God is bringing his wrath upon you. That is the wrong way to understand why things happen in our life. It's wrong. It's very, very wrong. We have things. If I tell one of my kids, you can't go outside to play because you have to finish your homework. So the kid protests and screams and yells. It can be a half-hour affair before they actually get to doing their homework. And I'm cruel and I'm mean, and no one should ever be cursed with a father like me. I'm not describing an actually real experience. Thank God my kids usually get over things in less than a half hour. That's the good news. But that scene, right? That scene. Now the kid understands why the parent is doing this. They understand it, but they protest it because that's not what they want. But at least they understand it. That puts things into a frame of mind, right? Likewise, someone walks into an operating room and they see someone's chest cut open, and they're performing, and the doctors are standing around with blades, right? The person, if he's from a civilized country, he knows that this is for the good of the person. It's terrible, but ultimately it's good. But then there are things that happen where it isn't in any way, shape, or form in our experience good. It just isn't good. It's not something that we understand. It's something that just appears to be mean, harsh, and cruel. And so what I'm sharing now is a very deep idea, okay? And I hope that no one's going to get offended by it, because sometimes, especially if someone's in a very tough spot, as you're listening to this, you may have a hard time digesting this. And I don't mean in any way to make someone's life harder. And if that happens, you can just click and disconnect, because sometimes certain messages are meant for certain times. But I still want to share this idea with the generality of all of us, that when we experience different levels of things, everything that God sends to us, he's sending to us with a purpose, deliberately. And the more profound the thing God is sending to us is, which is coming from an infinite God, and we are finite people, the more profound it is, the less we can actually grasp it and perceive it and understand it. And that's the reason why I've repeated numerous times in the last few weeks that when we see darkness, we know that in that darkness is embedded a light, because darkness has no purpose in and of itself. In and of itself is just destruction. And nothing God does is for the purpose of destruction. So, but sometimes what we cannot perceive, because we don't have the tools to perceive such a profound and bright light, shows up for us as darkness. But we need to know that it's not really darkness, because if we don't, then we will never be able to extract the light ultimately. And this is a very important message for the times we're going through now, because the times we're going through are in many respects dark, and for some people very, very, very dark. And we have to remind ourselves that every darkness has a light embedded within it. Now, I think I may have shared with you that I once walked into a doctor's office in the area here, and there's a guy there. I have no idea who the guy is, and he looks at me and he says, "I recognize you." I said, "You recognize me? Where are you from?" He said, "He's from Rhode Island." I said, "I've been to Rhode Island a couple of times in my life, but not for the last 25 years. I have no, we talked for another couple of minutes, and he says, I know where I know you're from." He knew me from some videos online. He was from for a few rare people that bumped into a video of mine, and he remembered me, and he says, "I have a question for you." And his question was an outcome of this week's Torah portion, the Torah reading of today. And his question was a very compelling question, which I've given so much thought to. I've given a lot of thought to it primarily because I am thinking about some questions are very hard to give an answer to, which is digestible. And my job is to make sure that people can work through sometimes the thicker areas of the Torah. At least that's how I see part of my job. So he asked me, how can a God who is supposedly a loving God tell us that these horrible, horrible curses are going to befall the Jewish people? That's what today's Torah reading is primarily. It's about the horrible things that will happen to the Jews if the Jews do not follow in the ways of God. The beginning of the portion says, if you follow in my ways, then all the blessings, and then it comes in an onslaught of most horrific things, of mothers starving so badly that they will eat their children. Just to give you one example of the horrific curses, it says. And these curses actually happened because they were referring to, the Torah was given to us in the desert. The temple was built about 400 years later. The temple was destroyed the first temple was destroyed 410 years later. And that's when these curses actualized. And truly, exactly as God describes it, is what happened during the destruction of the first and second temple. How can a God love us when he tells us such horrible things are going to happen to us? And it's a very compelling question. And I just want to say what I was so moved by, because I've come to be able to at least know in my head, if not in my heart, more and more, that, and this is connected with the message I said earlier about the two different types of suffering, a suffering that we can relate to and a suffering that we can't relate to, that God's relationship with us is an unconditional relationship. That's the reason why God made a covenant with us. The idea of a covenant is it's unbreakable. We're stuck, so to speak. That means even if I'm having a bad day, we made a covenant, our partnership sticks. God made a covenant with the Jewish people. And the truth is that God chose the Jewish people not because of any virtue that we had, because our virtue only came after he chose us. When God chose us, we did not have any virtue over anyone else. That is called an unconditional choice, an unconditional commitment. That is what we call unconditional love. If God chose us for a certain reason, that would be very dangerous, as we all know, because when we like someone for a particular reason, as we're taught in the Mishnah and Ethics of our Fathers, if your love is love which is dependent on something, if the thing that your love is dependent on goes away, your love goes away. It's that simple. One's built on the other. Unconditional love is the only type of love that doesn't go away. And so after all of these curses, these horrible things that God says will strike the Jewish people, God says this at the end. This is what the Torah says. I'm going to read the translation to you. But also, even though there is this, while they are in the land of their enemies, I will not have been abhorred by them, nor will I have rejected them. I will still not be abhorred by my people and the Jewish people, and I will still not reject them, even though these horrible things will happen to them. To obliterate them, I won't be so abhorred, and I won't reject them to obliterate them. To annul my covenant with them, for I am Hashem, their God. And here comes, on the heels of the great day of Lag BaOmer, the Yahrzeit of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, we have a teaching on this verse in the Zohar by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's son, Rabbi Elazar. And he says something that's very moving. He says, he shares an analogy. He says, imagine a man who's deeply in love with a woman, but the woman lives in a market of tanners who work hides. And tanneries have a horrible, horrible stench. Even according to Jewish law, if someone wants to open up a tannery, you're only allowed to open it up on one side of town where the wind blows out of town, not into town, because otherwise it will blow horribly into the town. And were she not in that tannery, in that tanner market, if she had not lived there, he would never go there. He was a dignified man. He would never go into a market of tanners because it stinks and you come out stinking, a horrible stench. But since she is there, it seems to him like the market of tanners is a market of spice merchants, where all the best odors in the world are there. In some way, I think we should all be able to relate to this. At some point in our life, we were in some state of love with someone, and the thorns looked like roses to us. And that's exactly what he's telling us. And here's what the Zohar then says. When we read in the Hebrew what we just read, we read that God will not abhor the Jewish people, nor will he reject them, lechalosam, to obliterate them, to destroy them. The word lechalosam means to destroy them, except that it's a misspelled word. When the Torah writes it, the Torah misspells it. It's not misspelled by mistake. It's not because they didn't use spell check. It's because God misspelled the word. How is it misspelled? Lechalosam is usually spelled chaf lamid vav saf, or taf. But over here it's chaf lamid taf. And why? So the Zohar tells us because when you take out the vav, kliya, which can mean destruction, now is read as kala, which means a bride. And God says that I do not abhor them when they are in their enemies' land, and I do not reject them, lechalosam, because they are my bride. Because they are my bride. And my love for them is so great that even when they find themselves in foreign environments, and even when they begin to smell like the tannery, meaning expressing a smell which is something that normally God rejects because it is abhorrent to God, God says, I still love them. And this is something that we have to work on imbuing within ourselves. That even though we do have experiences that are difficult experiences and that challenge us, and we ask ourselves, where is God now? And that's a very good question, which we need to say to God, because God wants to know that we want to know where he is. But somewhere deep in our soul knows And we can remind ourselves as well that in fact, God is with us. And that is where we get our strength to be able to go through the different challenges that every single one of us has. And the reason why we are able to is for a simple reason. Because we are God's bride, and God never leaves us. And God's love for us is eternal. And the fact that I am not feeling that love right now doesn't mean that God doesn't love me. It means that I'm having trouble because of my state of being and my perspective, which is limited, to be able to appreciate how God is interacting with me now. And sometimes we have a loved one. It can be a spouse, it can be a parent, it can be whoever, a dear friend, whoever it may be. And sometimes they are doing things which we feel we feel that they are being very, very unloving. And only in hindsight do we realize that what they were doing was actually very loving. I'm not going to say that's always the case, because our love is not perfect as human beings, but we've had instances where that was the case. And that reminds us that sometimes we are just not reading the story right. When it comes to God, we are very, very limited. We pray to God to show us revealed love. Sometimes God shows us something so deep and profound that we did not experience it as revealed love. And we experience it as pain. But we have to, in some part of us, remind ourselves that this isn't a rejection from God. This is God embracing me in a way where it's very difficult for me. And we call that darkness. But we have to know that every bit of darkness has tremendous light. And in fact, last night at the end of the call, at the end of our conversation, someone got on and was lamenting. It was very hard to hear because it was choppy and going in and out. But the response that I shared, there were just a few that were left on, was that, that the previous generations, their values were greater. They were much more committed to each other. They were much more dedicated. They stuck to their value system. They would sacrifice for another person. But today, and whatever the lament was about today's generation. And my comment back was, we are living in an unprecedented time. Not an unprecedented time because there is an epidemic going on in the world where there are more human beings than there ever was. It's an unprecedented spiritual time. It's unprecedented because we are specifically living in a time where it's the hardest time in all of history for a person to notice God. That is actually the case. It's the hardest time in all of history for a person to notice God. And this is an unprecedented opportunity because it gives us the opportunity that every single day we can get up, and in this darkness, we can reveal light. And what we do when we're doing that is we are transforming a state of darkness that no generation before us was ever able to transform, because they never experienced the level of darkness that we are experiencing. And this is what God needs from us right now. That's what God needs from us. We have complexes. We have insecurities. We often can't relate to anyone loving us, never mind God. And that feeds right into God. Why would anyone love me? I'm just a regular guy. I'm just another guy. There's nothing special about me. That's what we feel. And God says, you're just another guy. I put you there. You are exactly where you are because I put you there and I need you there. How can you say you're just another random, indispensable person? And when we become aware of that, we actually get in touch with that feeling of how God truly feels about every single one of us. We are his bride. And the more we are aware of that, the more we respond to God in kind. When, as the Alter Rebbe writes and has been writing in time in the last few days, Kemayim hapanim al panim, he quotes King Solomon, just as when a person looks into a mirror, you get back whatever you give the mirror. You give it a smile, you get back a smile. You give it a frown, you get back a frown. So just like God loves us and smiles to us, we must love God in return and smile back. And sometimes the way out of the darkness is just that. Sometimes the way we help someone get out of the darkness is by giving them one big hug. That's all the person needs. They just need someone to hug them. They don't need an answer. They don't need a fix. They just need to know that they're loved. And sometimes we have to remind ourselves that we are. And then we have this profound connection. Then we actually step up to do what God needs us to do. And then we reveal the light that's embedded in this very deep darkness. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And tomorrow evening at 6:30, same time, we have our get together from wherever, pre-Shabbos, l'chaim, and another thought. If anyone has any questions, objections, or rebuttals, I just unmuted you all. Now's the time to share.
Rabbi.
Yes.
So it's a big weight on your shoulders. I mean, I'm talking about us, the Jews, because Moshe Rabbeinu didn't bring the Mashiach. Rashi didn't bring Mashiach. Tanaim didn't bring Mashiach. It's up to us to bring Mashiach. It's a little bit, a little too much to grasp it.
Great question. So Reb Moshe is asking a fantastic question. His question is, if Moses couldn't bring Mashiach, right? If Rabbi Akiva couldn't bring Mashiach, if Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai couldn't bring Mashiach, how in the world are we going to bring Mashiach? Here's the answer of Moshe. You listening?
I'm here.
Yeah. I don't want you to be there. I want you to listen.
I'm listening. Go ahead.
Okay. Listen and then think about what I'm saying. Okay, I'm saying this for a reason, but just listen and then think about what I'm saying. Let it germinate. We are midgets on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah.
We are not greater than Moshe. We're not greater than Rabbi Akiva.
No, much less.
Right? I mean, if we were able to compare the generations, we know that. But the reason why Moshe Rabbeinu, the Midrash tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu was envious of you and I, of all of us. He was envious of all of us, is because God put us into a world that's in such a state of affairs, with such enormous challenges, with such a small attention span, with a single, with a single swipe to get access to everything that's destructive to any human being, to have power that with one button can destroy an entire world or energize an entire country, right? Nuclear power, right? We live in unprecedented times, but the times are very, very challenging, and we spiritually are much weaker than they've been. And yet we get up in the morning and we put on tefillin. That accomplishes more than the Jew putting on tefillin in the desert after the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. Not because we're greater. On the contrary, what makes it great is that because despite the fact that we're not as great, and we still do it. And we have to understand that there's a spiritual journey that we're going through. There's a history. We're not just living in an isolated time. We're part of a long history. And the history is the world going through a revelation of the divine presence in a material world. And in order for that to be actualized, we have to get deeper and deeper into the material world and bring godliness into that materialism. Moshe and his generation, they were in the desert. They were involved in the material world minimally. They didn't even plow a field to get food. When the Jews were in Israel, right, they were very engaged in the material world, but not nearly as much as you and I. The fact of the matter is, after the Industrial Revolution, we got deeper and deeper into the material world, which is very dangerous and made us far more material people. That's why we can't even relate to the spiritual level that they had, because we say in Yiddish, we're so vergrept, which means that we have become so coarsened by the physical world. But at the same time, and this is the key, and this is the whole point, at the same time, some people say this is terrible, and what did God do to us? God is giving us the opportunity to bring light into the deepest depths of materialism. God is giving us the ability to take this and use it for a godly purpose. And that's not easy, because with one swipe, I can go to things that make me feel good in so many different ways. Or with another swipe, I can go to something that is holy, but not necessarily so pleasurable. It requires me to focus and whatever.
Thank you,
And
Rabbi.
every time we choose to swipe in the right direction, we are transforming a deep, dark place in this world.
Great
So are
point.
we
Thank you,
better than
Rabbi.
Moshe? No. Are we accomplishing something enormous? Yes. How can we accomplish it? Specifically because the world is in a low place, and specifically because we are in a low place. When I say low, I just mean we're we are materially consumed. I'm not saying it as a judgment. It's not our fault. This is the entire purpose. This is the entire purpose. And that's why the darker the exile is, the closer we know we are to Mashiach. This is the reason why, I don't want to go on too much, but this is the reason why the pupil of your eye, which is black, is what sees, is what takes in the light to be able to see. It's the darkest part of your eye. This is the reason why when you look at a bright light, you become blinded. You don't become enlightened. This is the reason why the Talmud says that a blind person, we call a blind person in the Talmud, Sagi Nahar. He's illuminated. It's a nicer way than saying that someone is blind. But yet we use that terminology because blind and illumination have a deep relationship with each other. Darkness and light have a deep relationship, and the deeper the darkness, the greater the light it's associated with.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why Chassidus tells us. Should I go on and on? Why not? And that's why no one's dropping off yet. And that's the reason why Chassidus tells us. The higher the root of something is in the spiritual realms, it descends lower and lower.
Mhm.
And that's the reason why the Alter Rebbe teaches us that klipa, pure klipa, this divine spark in pure klipa, which ordinarily we're told is forbidden, you can't touch because the klipa, the shell, the darkness that hides that spark of God is so strong that we can't crack it. That divine spark is much higher than the spark in klipas noiga. That's than the spark in the klipa, which we can access and elevate. And that's why someone who does teshuva, which I know all of us, and I include myself, all of us have done and will continue to do. What is teshuva? I did something God said I shouldn't do, which is what we call klipa. That's I engaged in something that has a divine spark in it that's so locked up in darkness that God said you're not allowed to engage in it. Why not? Because you can't redeem it. And I engaged with it. And through that divine spark, that klipa became stronger by me engaging with it. I created more darkness in the world. And then one day I woke up and said, what did I do? What did I do? And I feel such regret for what I did. I promised myself I will never, ever do something like that again. Which means that the very engagement with that darkness is what inspired and propelled me to run from it. And when I do that, which is what we call teshuvah, and I run away from the negativity and I run towards God, when I do that, what is giving me the fuel? The negativity itself. That is the only way that divine spark, which is irredeemable, becomes redeemed. So it's only the Baal Teshuvah that reveals a level of divinity that is so high that the tzaddik can't go near it.
It's
The
time.
Baal Teshuvah never, unfortunately, went near it. But now he has an opportunity, right? Retroactively, you can't do this deliberately. But if someone went, he has a desire, and he went and he did something he shouldn't do, like we've all done. After the fact, he now has an opportunity that tzaddik never has. And that's why the Talmud says a Baal Tshuva is greater than a tzaddik. It's not to applaud Baalei Tshuva. That's not the intention. The intention is one intention, to say the truth. The truth is a Baal Teshuvah performs for the mission of history, something a tzaddik can't perform. And that's unbelievable. And every one of us has an opportunity on a daily basis. And I know that we're all doing it. And we have to do it more and more. And that is the meaning of being aware of darkness, of the spark of light that is embedded within darkness. So whenever we see a dark moment or we go through a dark period, we have to ask ourselves, insightful Jews ask, what is the light in this darkness? If you just see the darkness, You're just another person who's got not even 20/20 vision. It requires no insight to know that there's darkness here. Oh, it's so dark. Oh, it's so dark. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Tell me something we don't know.
All right.
What we don't know is that there's a deep light embedded in the darkness. And we have to have the insight to remind us of that during the period of darkness. And then we have the power to reveal it.
Okay.
That was a long-winded answer to Moshe.
Hi.
Can I ask a comment?
Okay.
That's, you know,
Okay.
Bye, Rabbi.
text that today, just.
Thank you.
Larry.
Bye.
I just
Bye-bye,
ate
Larry.
dinner
Thanks
and
for
had
joining
a
us.
review. I'm listening to Rabbi Weinstein.
Any
And
other
then the
objections?
Mila-
No, I just wanted to ask a comment.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Rabbi.
When you say that this generation,
out?
or this time period, is not as spiritual, I think like a major difference is, you know, and to say a good word for this generation, people that are spiritual or are spending time discussing these things are doing it voluntarily.
How is the patient?
Versus, you know, 1,000 years ago where you really didn't have any choice. You did it. And, you know, however far back you want to go in our history, if you were in a Jewish community, you really didn't leave the community. I mean, you did, there were rare instances, but it doesn't, I don't think that made everybody so much more spiritual. But today, when people decide to go, I mean, you wouldn't ever hear of someone going from a secular life to a religious life, but nowadays you do hear that all the time. So in that sense, we're actually a more spiritual society.
So that observation is a very important observation. Thank you for sharing it. I'm talking more about the quality of the spirituality, but again, it's not here to compare or to judge. But your observation is a very important observation to realize that we are living in a time also where more people are seeking, because the darkness is so strong that there are people who get revolted by it and they look for something meaningful. You know, a compromised darkness, you know, you have some, you know, you're having your cake and eating it too. But when things get too dark, you know, it's too dark and people then run to find the light. And thank God that many, many people are doing that.
But the prayers and But the prayers in the Bible constantly talk about the materialism of the people, the idolatry. I mean, straight after the, you know, the commandments, they were worshiping the golden calf. I mean, so many people stayed in Egypt because they were, you know, they chose slavery over the unknown. I mean, we killed each other in rebellions. The Jews killed each other, and you know, they obviously weren't thinking about a unified Jewry. I mean,